Today we're going to be jumping into Cinema 4D with a beginner-friendly project that anyone can follow along with. So this is what you're going to learn how to create today and what you're going to be able to texture, light, and so on. You're going to learn all of those basics and have something that you can walk away feeling really proud of yourself. 3D modeling a bar of soap was my ever first 3D modeling project. I did it many, many years ago, back in the day in a software called Alias. I feel like it isn't as commonly used anymore, and it's especially not used very often for 3D motion design. But you can learn so much from just 3D modeling something simple and getting used to moving around in the viewport. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and open up a new screen so that mine looks the same as yours. So now we're with a new blank project. How do we move around in the scene? Well, I like to use the middle scroll button to move in and out in the scene. If you hold Alt or Option, depending on if you're on a Windows or Mac, and you click on the left mouse button, you can see you can pivot around. So that's how you go ahead and pivot. If you would like to pan, well, you hold Alt or Option again, and you hit the middle mouse button, and you can pan side to side, up and down by dragging your mouse. So all of these are very helpful tools in order to get started. Now, there are some basic meshes you can add into your scene, and they come in these very basic shapes. If I hold a click over here to the right, you'll see all of these different forms like cylinder, cube, and all of these are called primitives. They're a great starting project whenever you're getting started inside of Cinema 4D, 3D modeling anything new. Most of the time, I'll first navigate over to one of these primitives here, or I'll navigate over to one of these spline shapes. Today we're going to be working with the cube primitive, so I'm going to drop that into my scene. And you'll notice that our cube is pretty big. Once we add in a cube, you can see all of its information options under the attributes menu. So we can choose its dimensions in the X, Y, and Z coordinates. Now, when we look at this control here, this is your axis. Green is Y, so that's the Y direction. Red is X, so that's the X direction. Z is blue, and that's the Z direction. So that's how you can determine where you're moving things in space. And also when you're setting up these dimensions here, really helpful to know exactly what you're deciding. So I'm going to make this 10 centimeters. In the X, in the Y, we're going to make this 2.5 centimeters. I need to make sure that I am clicked in here, 2.5 centimeters. Enter. And then for Z, I'm going to want to type in 5 centimeters. So now we have a very nice small bar of soap. And that's a pretty good starting point. There's something called fillets, and sometimes it's called a bevel. They are both the same thing, just two different types of terminology. So depending on if you have experience working in other 3D software, you may see different types of meaning. Cinema 4D actually uses both. Down here, you'll see this option called fillet. I'm going to check that on, and that basically adds curvature to those edges. And we'll control that in greater detail. The first thing that I'd like you to know before we do that is how to see your edges so that as we adjust our fillet, you can see how that's adjusting in real time. So let's go up to our display mode. You'll see right now we're in this garage shading mode, and that's really nice for having a preview of your lighting. It's very rough. It's not the same as rendering, of course, but this one below, garage shading lines, I'm going to click on that, and now you can see our edges of our model. So all 3D models, they're made up of points, edges, and polygons. So it's really helpful to be able to see your edges to help you understand what you're doing as you're 3D modeling. So I'm going to keep that on here for a moment. And you can see again how that affects this if I turn it on and off, the fillet. And now we can adjust the fillet radius. So if we look at this from a profile view, we're deciding that radius. Let's make it 0.5 centimeters and see how that's looking. I feel like that's even kind of big. Let's try 0.2. You can play around with these and see what works for you. You can also drag this dot here on the slider in order to adjust these values if you prefer that method. And then you can choose your number of subdivisions. So you can see here that all curves in Cinema 4D for the most part, with some exceptions if you're working with splines and NURBS, but we'll dive into that later on. You can adjust the number of subdivisions. So this creates the illusion of a smooth curve, but you can see that these curves are actually made up of straight edges. So that's just something to keep in mind here. So we can go with 3 or 4. It's really up to you on how much detail you would like. So I'll have that entered in there. Now let's say we want to add some really nice curvature in the center. Something like in our render over here, you can see I added in this nice oval-like form in here. It'd be pretty cool to have that ourselves. So let's go ahead and do that. You'll notice that there are these different modes up here: model mode, polygon mode, edge mode, and point mode. This is allowing you to select different elements in your scene. If you want to work with points, you're in point mode. Edges, you're in edge mode. Polygons, you're in polygon mode. However, when working with a primitive, you'll notice that we can't click on the individual polygons, even with our brush selection here, which you can use usually to be able to select different polygons, unless if you make this editable. So right now our cube is a primitive, which is a kind of parametric object, and parametric objects are controlled by values, like this one is here. Now if we want to adjust this with our 3D modeling tools, traditional 3D modeling tools, we'll need to make this editable, which will shift it over from a parametric primitive object into something we can warp and move and distort in all kinds of fun ways. So how do we do that? Well, you need to have your object selected that you would like to make editable, and you can click this button down here. You'll also see if I hover over the hotkey for that tool, which is C, as listed below. So we can click make editable, and now you can see that all these different tools became available to the left side for 3D modeling, and we can click in here. So that's pretty exciting. Now, something that I would like to do, as mentioned, is make this really cool circular element in here. So how do we make a circle on a cube? Well, let's first start adding in some more edges so that we have some extra geometry in order to make a circle. So the way you do that is with a tool, and you'll notice that if you want to open up your modeling menu, just in your viewport, you can hit the M button, and you'll see all these hotkeys for all these different great tools in here. Now, L is loop path cut, and that's a great way to add additional edges to our cube. So I'm going to choose L, and you'll notice that I can start hovering over these edges and choose an area to add this. Now, if I want to snap to, let's say, the center here and add in an edge in the center, in theory, if you hold Shift, you can start snapping to increments because you're enabling something called quantize. You don't need to be too concerned about that at this moment. I'm going to be throwing in a lot of terminology, You don't need to remember all of it. Just the more you do this and the more you follow along in these tutorials, all of a sudden it'll start clicking and you'll be talking like a professional 3D modeler, and that's my goal here. So let's go ahead and drop this in here. So I added this to the center. But what if I want to add in additional cuts? Maybe I want 2 so that we have a little bit more detail for this circular element on our beautiful soap. So what we're going to need to do is go over to our number of cuts. So we can determine the number of cuts we're creating in this, and we want to increase this from 1 to 2. So that's pretty nice. It's a good starting point, and it's added in 2 there. Now we also want ones on the side, so I'm going to add in a loop here, and I'm going to increase the number of cuts. And here I'm thinking about the resolution I would like for the circular element, and you can really experiment and decide what's best for you. The idea is that you want something that will look decent depending on how zoomed in you are. You'll notice, like for example, this curved edge here. If I zoom in really close, you're going to see that this isn't perfectly round. So you want to add in as many edges to a curve as needed to create that optical illusion of something being rounded when you look at its profile. So I'm thinking about that here. Perhaps we want to add in something like 30. This is really personal preference depending on the project, so don't worry too much about it. You'll get an idea for it the more you do this, how many edges you need. And we'll want to select points because we want to turn these points into a circle. So we're going to change from our polygon mode to our point mode over here. And we're going to select our points using our brush selection. You'll see the hotkey for this is 9, in case if you want to get used to the hotkeys here. And if you ever forget them, just hover over the tool and you'll see it become available. So I'm going to hold a click and add in these here. And I'll add in these here. If you ever click off to the side and then you realize, oh, I want to add more to my selection, you just need to hold Shift with your brush selection and add in more that way. So Shift is adding in more, Control is removing from your selection, so I can also remove from my selection. I want to add these in here, so I'm not going to be doing any removing with Control. And that would be Command for a Mac, by the way, Control or Command, depending on what type of computer you're working on today. And there's this really cool tool down here you'll see called Fit Circle. We're going to be using that today in order to make this into a circular shape, and then we can stretch it out into a beautiful oval. So I'll click this here, and I'll just click and drag, and you'll see we have this showing up. So this is pretty nice. You'll notice that the circle looks a little bit twisted. You can actually adjust its angle of twist in here. Whenever you activate a tool, you'll see its options available in here. So you'll see Fit Circle, and we can adjust the angle. So I can move this a little bit if I would like. Maybe something like this. We can see how that looks from our top view. And that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to use a new tool today, and you can activate it with the T hotkey, Scale, and then you can just pull this out like so. So here we go. Now we have a very nice oval-like shape for our bar of soap. Now what if we want to extrude this down to create this similar shape here? We can see that our bar of soap that we're working on is extruded down. Well, we can do that by navigating back into our polygon mode. And we just need to select these in here, making sure we even get the little polygon up here. We'll just select all of that. The extrude tool you'll see listed over here. The hotkey for it is MT, so you can activate it by clicking on it here or using the model menu by opening up MT. So now we can extrude down by clicking and dragging. And after you extrude, you can then use the T hotkey for your scale, and you can click and drag to scale this in a little bit. So now we have this nice little detailing going on around the edge. You can decide how much you would like that to be chamfered. And another nice little detail I like to add along hard edges are bevels. Remember, bevel and fillet are the same thing. We'll need to select our loops along these edges in order to bevel them. You'll see we have the bevel tool up here, and the hotkey for it is MS. But first, let's select those edges. So I'll go into edge mode, and I'll select the loops using the hotkey U. So I think of this as a lot of the selection tools in here. There's some additional tools in here beyond selection, but you'll see under L is loop selection. Most of them are for selection, so UL. We'll go ahead and select this loop here. And then if we hold Shift, we can select this loop too and add it to our selection so that when we bevel this, we can adjust both. So let's go over to our bevel here, or you can use the hotkey MS, and I'll click and drag. You'll see we're getting these really nice little bevels along here. Now you can increase your subdivisions, very similar to what we did when we added in fillets here. Same thing goes for the bevel tool here. And we can increase these as so to a number we like. And now we have a bar of soap, your very first 3D model. Now what would make this even better? A second 3D model that is a dish for our bar of soap. So let's go ahead and get started on this one. This one's a little bit fun because it's a little bit of a funkier shape. You can see it here. I made it wavy so that when the bar of soap is wet, your bar of soap doesn't get soggy. And we added on these cute little spherical feet here to add this uplifted feeling to our dish while it's holding our bar of soap. It gives a more elevated experience to your soap usage. Sorry, I come from an industrial design background and sometimes it comes through. But let's go ahead and design this. So let's get into our splines here. So I actually had used, the first time I did this, I used a wave spline. So these are super fun. So I'm going to drop that into our scene. And you'll notice that this thing is huge. Like I need to zoom out very far in order for you to see this spline. And a spline is a really nice way to start off for 3D modeling some forms. And that's very similar to this profile here. So you can see what we're working with and what we're going towards. So right now, we need to adjust the width to something more reasonable. Let's try 15. And zoom in. Middle mouse button scroll on in here. And now we'll adjust the height to something like, let's see what 2 looks like. That's still pretty big. Let's try 1. Let's try 0.5. So you can adjust these until they look right to you. And I'll move this up for a minute so they can see it. Now we can choose our frequency. Right now it's at 8. I'm going to increase this up to 12, and that's how many waves we'll get in our soap dish. And then I'll drop this on down. Now we want something to sweep this shape across, so we're going to need a secondary spline. And this time we're going to use a arc so that we get some nice curvature. So I'll drop this arc in here. And again, everything comes in really, really large. You can see how big that is. So let's go ahead and reduce this to something a little bit more reasonable. Going to go ahead and adjust this in here. You can adjust the start angle and end angle. So I'm going to adjust the end angle, and then we'll adjust the start angle. And I'm envisioning how this would go along here. Or we could start off with it going this way too. So it's really optional, because we can always start bending it the other way after we do this. Sometimes I like to go into a side view so that I can see this better. So you can do that with the middle mouse button, and you'll see all 4 views. And if we zoom in here, you'll see exactly what side we're viewing. So let's use our front view here. So I just click the middle mouse button. That allows us to go into this view. So this looks pretty good to me. And now we need to sweep the shape across here. So in our here, you'll see that we have something called sweep. And we can actually change the direction in which this is facing. So right now it's facing towards us. But we can change what plane this is on. So we can choose XY, ZY, and so on. So maybe I want to sweep it this way. To create something like that. The great thing about this is we can always adjust this further. I'm going to click on our arc and our wave and drop this under the sweep. So right now it may look a little bit chaotic, but we're going to adjust this and it'll work. So under our sweep, we have this option to use a 2-rail system. And I find that works best. So we're going to need 2 of these arcs. So we're sweeping this shape along here. So let's make 2 of these arcs. So now we have arc 1, arc 2. And if we move them, like I can move this arc off to the right, and I can move this arc off to the left, you can see that these are sweeping. And we're getting this shape. And then from here, we can even go in and adjust our arc a little bit more. And here I can click and drag to adjust the shape. But we'll need to make sure that we do the same on both of these. So I'll actually hit undo and click on both of these so that we adjust these values together so that both arcs stay the same. And you can play around with what you would like this soap dish to look like. So that's super fun. And maybe we want this to be a little bit wider. Something like that. Something like this. And we can even adjust what type of wave this is if you're interested. You can do a cosine wave. I think that I will do a cosine wave because look at how that changes the shape. It looks a little bit more symmetrical than the sine wave. So I'm going to move forward with cosine so that the ends match up a little bit more. And now we need to add some thickness. So we had created a surface here. We've created a solid form and we've created a surface. Now, how do we make this surface have some thickness to it? Well, there's a generator. Under this menu, there's a bunch of generators, and our sweep was a generator. So generators are used to create geometry in a parametric form where you can just adjust some values and create something, which is really wonderful. So that's how we made this surface. But we'll also need to create some thickness to this. And you'll see there's this tool here called the Thicken tool. So I'm going to use this. Now it won't be activated until we drop what we would like to thicken within the hierarchy of the thicken. So we want to thicken the sweep. So I'll drop this in here. And right now it's thickening it way too much. So we're going to make this much smaller, like 0.2 for right now. And that looks much, much, much better. So thickening can also be called shelling, depending on what 3D software you're coming from. You may hear this be called shelling. You may hear it be called thicken. They are both about the same thing. You are just adding thickness to a surface. And that is what we are doing here. And I like to make sure that these curves at these more intense curved areas are looking okay, and they are. So this is good. If you want to do even more with this, add some more curvature to your soap dish, you can do something like adding in a deformer. So you'll see that these, if I hold to click on this purple tool here, there's all of these different types of deformers here, and they deform your surface. Thus the name. I like to use the Sphärify. And if we want the Sphärify to affect our thicken, there's a couple different ways we can do that. So the first way is we can place the Sphärify within the hierarchy of the thicken, but I would much more prefer to do this a different way because you can see we already have so much going on here. The second way of doing this is we can add in a null object, and you can think of this as kind of like a folder for holding your parts of your models, and we can name this soap dish. And now we can add our thicken in our soap dish and our Sphärify within our soap dish. And now you can see that the Sphärify is actually affecting our soap dish. I'm going to adjust the radius of our Sphärify. You can see it's a pretty big sphere right now. You can also see that the soap dish is basically being deformed and wrapping around the spherical shape we have here. We're able to control its curvature to a certain degree with just using the spherical shape here by adjusting its radius and its strength. So this is the strength of the deformation. So if I zoom in really close here, you can see as I increase this, we are curving more and more around it. If we boost this up to 100%, it basically becomes flat against the sphere. We don't want that, so we're going to decrease this a little bit. Sometimes I like to click and drag on the numbers themselves, and I find that easier. So that's looking good. Now we need to add some little feet to our dish, and I'd love to do that with some spheres. So I'm going to collapse this all by hitting the minus here. And we're going to drop in a sphere. Now, as I said, the primitives come in very big. So you can see how huge this is. Let's make it something like 0.2 for the radius and see how small that is. And if that's too small, it is too small. Let's try 0.5. So this is looking better. You can envision where you would like the spherical feet to go. I may move this over. Okay. So what if we want to mirror this foot onto each side of our soap dish? Well, we can do that. There is a symmetry generator. I don't know if you were guessing that, but you may have been because we've been 3D modeling for a minute here. So under our generators, you'll see that we do in fact have this symmetry, and it's this nice little butterfly icon because butterflies are symmetrical, and that'll help you remember what it is. Now we're going to drop our sphere into our symmetry generator, and you'll see something magical happens. We have this red plane in here. So what is this? Well, let's talk about that. If we click on our symmetry, you'll see that like in our axis here, when I said red is for the X direction, that color is used frequently throughout Cinema 4D to represent the X direction. So we're having this plane here because we are mirroring along the X, and you can see this here. So if we turn this off, we'll no longer mirror along the X, and you won't see a foot over here. If I turn this on, you'll see that we are mirroring this direction across our origin, which is where objects are automatically located when you drop them in. So now what we want to do is mirror across the Z direction. Now that we have it mirrored across the X, you'll see that we still need feet on the other side here. So Z is blue. So if we turn this on, it will be blue. It will create a blue plane that we can see. So let's switch this from off to on. And now you'll see that we are mirroring onto the other side. And now we have these lovely little feet for our soap dish. So I'm going to name this symmetry feet, and the sphere I'm going to name feet as well. So if you double click on something, you can then enter in its name, which is very helpful. And I'll rename our cube soap bar. Now we need something for this to sit on, so I'm going to add in another primitive, holding a click here. We're going to drop in a plane, and I'm just going to grab everything, and I'm going to move it on up in model mode, not edge mode, model mode. So I switched into model mode, and I'm just going to move this all up. And if you're having trouble seeing if you're lining things up directly with the plane, again, the middle mouse button is our friend. Let's switch out of perspective view with the middle mouse button. And we can look in our 4 views and help us visualize us moving this on up. So now we have a lovely soap dish. So middle mouse button lets you click in and out of different perspectives. It's floating a little bit. Is it? No, that's an optical illusion. It is not floating. It looks pretty well lined up. Okay, so that's something you need to get used to, is making sure that your models are in fact not floating, because that's a very easy problem to run into. I also want to move in the sphere a little bit, just so that's a little bit more centered here, like so, and that looks better. So now we're on to a really fun part. We can add in some materials and lighting. So this is one of my most favorite things because you get to see your model become a thing and look like a real thing, not just like a bunch of edges and points and polygons. Now it'll look like a physical thing that you could pick up and hold in your hand. And that is super exciting for me. You know, we're creating something from nothing. We created something from points and edges alone. And if that's not magic, I don't know what is. So let's go ahead and do that. If you don't already have this little panel here, you can open it and close it by clicking this button here. This is called your Material Manager. And thus the name implies this is where you manage your materials. So under our Create menu, we are going to be creating a open PBR material. So let's start off with just making a real basic, simple material for our floor. I'm going to double click on this and name it floor. And you'll see we have some very basic options in here. Let's start off with our base options and our base properties. When we click on this, you'll see that you can view the materials in not just your attribute manager, but also you can open up a new menu, or a new window rather, where you can adjust this using something called nodes. So we're going to do some basics with the nodes in a moment, but for right now, I'm just going to work in this attributes manager, and we're going to change the color. So I'm feeling like making this like a little bit of an off pink here. You can see we get this color chooser. You can choose whatever color delights you. You know, get creative. You don't need to make the same exact thing as me. Experiment with color palettes. I really like how red and green are complementary colors, so I like mixing them together a little bit. And you can see that I did a little bit of this here. These pinks have a lot of red in them, and that contrasts really nice with green. So now we have a slightly pink, off pink, dusty pink floor. How we add this is you can drag and drop this on here, or you can drag and drop your material onto the object within your objects manager. I'm just going to drop this on here in the viewport. And you can see that it's color updated a little bit. It isn't that default gray color we usually see. Now, something else you can do in here, if we click on our material, is you may want to adjust the roughness. So 0.3 is pretty shiny. I feel like making this 0.5, and that increases the roughness. So we're increasing the roughness value. All right. And then we're going to need to do something else. We're going to need to create a material for this soap dish here. So let's create a new material. Materials, open PBR. PBR is for physical materials, physically based rendering materials. So we're going to double click on this and we're going to name this soap dish. Now let's create a nice glass material. And we're going to drag and drop this on here. If you'd like to start previewing your materials, you can go ahead into your Redshift menu and turn on Start IPR. Now keep in mind, if you don't have a Redshift license and you are just working with Cinema 4D with the Redshift that comes with that, you only get GPU rendering if you are paying for a Redshift license or Maxon 1. So keep that in mind because sometimes it can take a long time to render if you don't have one of those licenses because you'll be using something called CPU. So you'll be rendering with a different part of your computer and it just takes a little bit longer to calculate. I'm rendering with GPU rendering. with Redshift. So you'll notice that we have these materials added. Let's go ahead and click on this. Now you'll notice that we want this to be clear. We don't want an opaque soap dish in here. If we adjust the color in here, we can do so and it will adjust up in here. But it looks very opaque and that's not what we're going for. So this base is determining an opaque material, these base options. And yes, you can make it look more metallic by increasing the metalness. I'm going to decrease that back to 0 here. And I'm going to decrease the weight, which is the strength of these attributes, to 0 because I want this to be fully transparent. So I'm just turning off that base, okay? And we're going to scroll down. We want this to be fully transmissive, so we're going to increase this. Now, a quick warning here, you should save your project before you do a whole lot of rendering because sometimes things crash. Okay, and we're going to increase this transmission to 1, and now you can see it's clear. And isn't that exciting? I always find that so exciting. Okay, and it's kind of got this roughness to it, which is nice. We do have a little bit of roughness to this, and that's all right with me. I think that looks cool, but if you want this to be not rough at all, you can also adjust that there. I like having a little bit of added roughness, so I'll do the 0.3. And you can see it just makes the glass look a little bit more foggy. It has a foggy look to it. Now for our color, we can choose our transmissive color, and that's the color that you see when light passes through. So I can make this a very light pink color. And I just think that is so charming. Let's go ahead and add this to our soap dish as well. Right on over here. Our soap dish feet, I mean. So I'll open this up and I can see that our feet are here. So let's drag and drop this here. So now I can see that the material is applied to the feet. Now we're working with the default lighting in here, which in my opinion is a little bit cringe. Although it allows you to preview your materials, it doesn't look very polished. So let's go ahead and drop in a light here. So right off the bat, whenever you add in a light, it is super bright and super huge. Now this is a little bit intense, I'd say so myself, but I'm going to move this back a little bit, so that helps. The further away your light is, the more diffuse lighting you have. I'm going to shrink this down. So the size and the distance affect the diffuse. Actually, shrinking it down makes it a little bit less diffuse, but I want to get these really interesting, you can see coloring there. And we're going to make that look even better by adjusting our Redshift settings in a moment. So if you're like, Leah, that doesn't look like really nice caustics on the floor, it's okay. We're going to make it look good in a moment. We're just adding in a light here so that we have something to work with. So I like scaling the lights to adjust them. I'm using the T hotkey to scale, E hotkey to move. And that works for 3D modeling. It works for lights as well. It's the same. E for move. R for rotate. So we can also rotate. We're rotating around. And E to move. That looks pretty. I mean, it's a nice little bar of soap. Very nice, very fancy. Now, as I mentioned, the caustics aren't the best, so how can we improve them? Well, one thing that I'd like to do is actually increase this light a little bit. You can increase the intensity here. Don't know why it's jumping to that high of number, just a little bit, like so. Now in your redshift settings, you can enter your settings, render settings in here. This is our render settings menu. I'm going to switch over into the advanced mode. It just gives us more buttons, and I find that helpful. And under redshift, you can choose your threshold. The higher the threshold, the less detail you'll have in your final render when we export it out. These are not the settings for rendering in your viewport. That's different. But I'm just going to keep this on 0.01 for right now. That's like a pretty nice render. It'll be good enough for what we're doing. Under denoising, that'll help remove noise in our render. And I will enable this because clear materials take a long time to render if you don't turn on the denoiser. The denoiser makes them look nice and polished with less time of doing calculations on your computer, which is super nice. Now, my favorite denoiser is the Altus Single because it is good at keeping in texture information in your scene and not smoothing it out. So the denoiser does smooth out things a little bit. But this doesn't smooth out the textures that you want to keep as much, those nice details that you add in your materials. So I like to turn on the Altus Single because it respects that a little bit more. And now that we have that, I want to turn on the caustics because that's what's going to make this look better. So take a picture of this in your mind because it's about to get a lot better. This is the before. Now we click on caustics. We're going to turn them on. And you'll see that this has shifted. We're getting much more realistic lighting in here in terms of how the light passes through and creates these really interesting light patterns on our floor surface, which is just so much fun for me. I absolutely love caustics. They are gorgeous. And you don't need to adjust things a whole lot in here to get a pretty decent result in Redshift. Just turn it on and leave it at the default settings. You don't have to do anything fancy until you reach that point in your career. This will get you pretty far. You could even do this for a professional project, and I think in most cases it will work. Okay, so that's looking nice. Now we're going to create a bar of soap. Now this material may feel a little bit advanced, but I believe in you and we're going to go through it step by step because a bar of soap is not the same as a plastic material. Like, let me show you an example. There are some materials that are opaque, like this little remote here. Hopefully you can see that. This is plastic. Okay. And it's also a little bit dusty, so I hope you don't mind that. But this here is plastic. If you shine a light through it, it's not going to change how it looks a lot. It's not going to change its color. However, like those candles behind me, if you look at them, you'll notice that the light is affecting its color a whole lot more because it's not as opaque. So we're talking about a more transparent material. Whereas if you have an opaque plastic, you don't need to show how light bounces throughout the object to create different types of colors depending on how close that surface is to a light or its thickness, because the thickness of an object can determine how it looks when light passes through it and bounces around in the object. So a bar of soap has something called subsurface scattering, and that's the same as what you'd see in something like a candle, like over here. So we're going to be creating a subsurface scattering material, which is a little advanced, but you can do it, and you can do it even in this beginner project, and you can feel super proud of yourself and have something looking super professional. So we're going to name this material bar of soap. So I'm going to double click on this, and we're going to be adventurous and work with nodes this time. And we're going to create a new node. So under create menu, add nodes. And then we're going to search for something called max on noise. And this is probably one of my favorite nodes because you can get some real nice effects with it just out of the box. Okay, so we're going to drag and drop that into our node editor. I'm going to hit this X button here. You'll see that if we connect this to the color, we can kind of preview what's happening here once we add this to our bar of soap. Already? So you can see we're getting some differentiation in color. You can adjust the number of octaves in here, add in more detail or not. You can also adjust the scale of this. I'm going to change the octaves to 8. That's basically how much detail is in this noise texture. And you can adjust its scale. So I can reduce its scale a little bit. And you can see this noise a little bit more on this bar of soap. So I just want you to be familiar with that. I'm actually going to choose a different type of noise. Right now we're on the default noise. I would like to use sparse convolution. And you can see that that's just a little bit more faded. The pattern is a little bit more faded. And then I want to make this much larger. So what we're doing is we're just adding a little bit of imperfection to the surface, a little bit of variance in color. Now we aren't going to keep this noise black and white. We want to do something a little bit more interesting than that. So let's go up here. Let's change our color 1 to a light green. And I don't want it to be overly saturated, so I think I'll choose something like that. And then for our second color, we're going to choose another green color. Not too saturated, but a little, slightly bit darker, maybe something like that. And I'll adjust this first color to be a little bit lighter. So you can see how just that little bit of color change makes a big difference. Now, this bar of soap doesn't look quite right. And that's because right now it's like plastic. It doesn't have the light passing through it, creating a cool effect. So I'm going to open this up again. I'm going to now disconnect this. We were just using that in order to see the noise and set it up. But now we're going to use that to control the subsurface scattering instead of just that surface color. So I'm going to disconnect that. So I'm going to now click on our open PBR material. You'll see the same settings in here as what you see in your attributes manager for the material. It's just 2 different ways of entering those same settings. So what we're going to do is we're going to decrease our base to 0 so that we no longer have this plasticky look added to our soap. And now what we're going to want to do is scroll down and increase our subsurface all the way to 1, which means full influence. And you'll see it already looks a little bit different. It already looks a little bit more like a bar of soap, the way light is interacting with it. So that's really wonderful. And I mean, it looks beautiful as it is right now. You wouldn't even need to do too much more to it. But we are going to add this green color. So I want to add this to the subsurface color here. And how we do that is we hold Control or Command and click on this dot in order to add in a port here for our subsurface color. If a setting isn't showing up in here, you just hold Control, click on the dot, it shows up then on the node itself. We're going to connect our max on noise now to our color. And now you can see we're getting this. And our radius scale color is this orange color, and I don't like that for a bar of soap. So I'm actually going to change that color to white. You'll see that. That looks so much better. And this looks like a very nice bar of soap. Quickly, if you would like to export out your render after you've set up your lighting and everything, maybe you want to render it out, go up here to your render settings, and under output, choose your width and height in pixels that you would like to export out. We're exporting out the current frame, so frame 0. And we're going to save this. Choose a location to save this. Choose what you would like to export this out as. You can export out a JPEG or a PNG. I usually choose a PNG. I like to increase the depth from 8-bit to 16-bit while working with PNG so you get that full range of color. And then you can just go ahead and hit this render button here and it will render it out for you. It might take a little bit. And if you have any questions, please feel welcome to leave them in the comments below or in the Discord server, which I'll leave a link to. That is your very first 3D model. Maybe some of you are following this beginner tutorial and this isn't your first 3D model and you just want to make some cool caustic materials. I'm so happy you joined. And if you would like to learn more 3D modeling tools or have more resources for even starting a design business and such like that, you can check out my website, ambient3danimations.com, for other learning resources, or check out my other videos and learn more 3D modeling, texturing, and rendering here inside of Cinema 4D and Redshift and beyond.